Greenland, 2017. A team of climate scientists drills through 150 feet of ice. Their equipment beeps steadily until it doesn't. The radiation detector spikes. Something metallic reflects in the ice core, something that shouldn't be there. They've found the ghost of Camp Century. In 1959, the United States Army began constructing what they called a polar research station beneath the Greenland ice sheet. They told Denmark, Greenland's governing nation, it would study ice mechanics and Arctic survival techniques. They brought 200 soldiers. They installed a nuclear reactor. They carved 21 tunnels stretching nearly 2 miles into the glacier. Denmark believed the cover story. Congress believed it. Most of the soldiers digging the tunnels believed it. But Camp Century wasn't about research. It was the prototype for Project Iceworm, a plan to deploy 600 nuclear missiles in mobile launch positions scattered across 52,000 square miles of ice. An invisible arsenal, impossible to target. Just 800 miles from Moscow. The plan failed, the ice moved, the tunnels collapsed. In 1966, the Army abandoned Camp Century, leaving behind diesel fuel, radioactive waste, and the reactor itself, buried under ice that was supposed to seal it away forever. Except the ice is melting now, and the secrets are rising. This is the story of the Cold War's most audacious hidden base, the deception that built it, the men who lived beneath the ice, and why America's frozen secret is about to become the world's problem. Greenland stretches across 836,000 square miles, 3 times the size of Texas. 80% lies buried under an ice sheet averaging 1 mile thick. In summer, temperatures hover near freezing. Winter drives them to 60 below zero. Coastal settlements cling to exposed rock. The interior remains a frozen desert where winds reach 200 miles per hour and nothing survives. But pull out a polar projection map and Greenland's true significance becomes clear. It sits directly between North America and Europe, the shortest route across the Atlantic. More critically, it forms the northern gateway to the continent. Any Soviet bomber heading for New York would cross Greenland 18 minutes before impact. Any American bomber heading for Moscow would do the same. The ice sheet itself presents a natural fortress. No army could march across it. No invasion force could establish supply lines through it. But if engineers could tunnel beneath the surface, they would gain something invaluable. A base invisible to satellites, protected by millions of tons of ice and positioned at the strategic center of the Cold War. The Inuit had inhabited Greenland's coasts for 4,500 years before Denmark claimed the island in 1721. For 2 centuries, Copenhagen largely ignored its Arctic possession. Whalers worked the waters, trading posts dotted the shore. Otherwise, Greenland remained forgotten. April 9, 1940 changed everything. German forces invaded Denmark and conquered the country in 6 hours. Greenland's governor, Eske Brun, declared independence from occupied Denmark and invited American protection. Within months, U.S. military personnel arrived to establish weather stations and prevent German operations. The reason was simple. Atlantic weather patterns form over Greenland, control the weather data, and you control naval forecasting across the entire ocean. The United States built Bluey West 1 Air Base in 1941, creating the stepping stone for aircraft flying to Britain. By 1945, American strategists recognized what previous generations had missed. Greenland wasn't just useful in wartime, it was essential. The atomic age made that calculation absolute. September 3, 1949, a U.S. Air Force weather reconnaissance plane detected elevated radiation levels over the Pacific. The Soviet Union had successfully tested a nuclear weapon, years ahead of American predictions. The nuclear monopoly vanished overnight. Strategic planners faced a new reality. Both superpowers possessed city-destroying weapons. Both needed delivery systems. Bombers could be intercepted. Surface bases could be targeted. The military needed something mobile, hidden, and invulnerable to first strikes. In 1951, the United States reactivated Greenland installations under a defense agreement with Denmark. Thule Air Base opened that same year. America's northernmost installation, positioned 947 miles from the North Pole and 1,524 miles from Moscow. Official purpose: early warning radar and bomber defense. But radar stations could be seen. Bomber bases appeared on reconnaissance photos. The Strategic Air Command needed something revolutionary: not visible infrastructure that Soviet satellites could photograph, not fixed silos that could be targeted. Something under the ice, where reconnaissance couldn't reach, where missiles could move on underground rails, shifting positions impossible to destroy with a preemptive strike. In 1958, an Army engineer named Edwin Weeks proposed exactly that. Lieutenant Colonel Edwin Weeks worked for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Cold Regions Research and Engineering Laboratory. In 1958, he walked into a Pentagon briefing room with an ambitious proposal: build a city under the Greenland ice sheet. The pitch focused on scientific advancement, study ice mechanics at depth, develop construction techniques for extreme environments, test whether humans could sustain operations in isolated artificial habitats. The research could apply to Antarctic exploration, deep-sea installations, even future moon bases. Pure science, peaceful purposes. Denmark received a carefully edited version of this proposal. Prime Minister H.C. Hansen reviewed plans for what Americans called Camp Century, the city under ice, a nuclear-powered research facility that would advance polar engineering and climate science. Hansen approved the project and authorized construction on Danish territory. What Danish officials never saw was the classified annex. The real blueprint carried a different name: Project Iceworm. While engineers publicly discussed ice research, military planners solved a tactical problem. How do you deploy 600 Minuteman nuclear missiles across 52,000 square miles of ice sheet? How do you make them mobile on underground railways so they constantly shift positions? How do you supply, maintain, and operate this network entirely beneath the surface, invisible to Soviet reconnaissance? Camp Century wasn't the mission, it was the test. If engineers could build one functional base under the ice, they could build 60. A sprawling underground missile network spanning northern Greenland, undetectable, unreachable, immune to first-strike destruction. The deception extended beyond Denmark. Foreign Minister H.C. Hansen genuinely believed Camp Century served scientific purposes. The Pentagon told him so through official diplomatic channels. Documents describing Project Iceworm carried security classifications above his clearance level. Even Danish liaison officers stationed at Thule Air Base received no indication that the research station concealed military intentions. This pattern wasn't unprecedented. During the late 1950s, the United States stored nuclear weapons in 27 countries, often without informing host governments. But Greenland represented sovereign Danish territory. International law required informed consent for military construction. The arrangement violated that principle through deliberate omission. For the 200 soldiers who volunteered for Arctic duty, political complications didn't matter. Construction battalion recruits heard about an engineering project in Greenland. High pay, accelerated discharge credit, adventure posting to one of Earth's most extreme environments. They arrived in summer 1959 and found 24-hour daylight, temperatures that froze diesel fuel solid, and wind strong enough to knock men off their feet. Their assignment? Tunnel into a living glacier using modified Swiss mining equipment. Captain Donald Weaver commanded the construction operation and maintained detailed logs. His entries reveal personnel who understood they were building something extraordinary without grasping its full scope. One report notes, tunnel extensions continue forward. Some men question the ultimate objective. I inform them we proceed as directed. Private James Morgan wrote home, "Mom, I can't discuss what we're building, but it represents the most important work I'll ever do. Also, we have hot showers, luxury compared to other Arctic stations. That detail mattered." Camp Century offered heated, pressurized living quarters. Previous Arctic installations were miserable. This one was comfortable. Comfortable enough to keep men working efficiently. Comfortable enough to prevent them from asking too many questions. October 3, 1960, engineers lower the PM-2A nuclear reactor into a reinforced trench 28 feet below the ice surface. This portable nuclear power plant represents revolutionary design. Prefabricated, shielded, transportable, theoretically safe. Above it, 200 men live in ice tunnels that could collapse. If the reactor fails catastrophically, if it melts through the glacier, if radiation leaks into the confined space, no evacuation plan works at 50 below zero in total darkness. The nearest hospital sits 150 miles away at Thule. The Pentagon watches closely. If this succeeds, portable reactors could power remote bases worldwide. Arctic stations, Vietnamese fire bases, German command posts. If it fails, the entire mobile nuclear program dies here. Control room. Captain Marvin Stewart gives the order. Technicians withdraw control rods, neutron counters click. Slowly, then faster. The reactor approaches criticality. Clicking peaks. Dials stabilize. PM2A generates 1.5 megawatts, enough electricity for a small American town. Lights throughout Camp Century burn brighter. Heating systems roar to full capacity. The Ice City has a heartbeat, but engineers notice something unexpected within weeks. The reactor's heat melts ice around its chamber. Water pools at the foundation. Refreezing creates stress fractures. Worse, the glacier moves 3 feet annually, and the reactor moves with it, pulling against coolant lines and power cables. Camp Century works. The reactor runs continuously for 3 years. It also proves something else. You cannot control a glacier. The ice moves. It melts. It crushes. Whatever you bury in it won't stay buried forever, and won't stay where you put it. Thousands of miles away in Moscow, Soviet intelligence begins piecing together what's really happening under the Greenland ice. By 1961, Camp Century reaches full operational capacity. 21 tunnels stretch 1.9 miles through solid ice. The statistics sound modest until you understand what engineers actually built. Main Street runs 100 feet long, 26 feet wide, 28 feet high, carved directly into the glacier. Arch-shaped tunnels prevent collapse from ice pressure. Temperature holds steady at 10 below 0 Fahrenheit, cold enough to prevent melting, warm enough to work without extreme cold weather gear. The facility includes a mess hall serving hot meals 3 times daily, a theater showing movies twice weekly, a library stocked with 2,000 books, recreation hall with ping-pong tables and weightlifting equipment, medical facility capable of performing surgery, scientific laboratories maintaining the cover story, communications center with encrypted links to Thule and the Pentagon, a chapel for Sunday services, buried fuel tanks store thousands of gallons of diesel. Vehicle maintenance shops keep snow tractors operational. Generators provide backup power. And the secret sections, known only to officers with proper clearance, test tunnels extending miles beyond mapped areas. Survey equipment measuring ice stability across vast distances. Prototype mobile launcher platforms. Everything Project Iceworm needs to prove you can deploy missiles on rails beneath a moving glacier. The ice walls require weekly maintenance. Glacier pressure makes them creep inward. The tunnels slowly close like a crushing fist. Engineers calculate they have perhaps 10 years before ice pressure renders the facility uninhabitable. 10 years, just enough time to prove the concept and construct the real network. For enlisted personnel, Camp Century creates a surreal existence. You climb down a snow ramp each morning and enter an artificial world. No weather inside, no distinction between day and night, just fluorescent lights humming constantly. Private Daniel Murphy later described the psychological impact. You lose all sense of time. Is it Tuesday? Is it June? The calendar becomes meaningless. You sleep when exhausted, eat when hungry. Some men loved it. No rain, no sun causing heat exhaustion. Others struggled mentally. One soldier insisted on going topside daily, even in 60 below temperatures, just to see the sky. The Army learned from earlier Arctic failures. Well-fed soldiers work harder and complain less. Camp Century serves remarkable food. Steaks, fresh vegetables flown weekly from Thule, ice cream made with glacier meltwater. Coffee flows constantly. Strict hierarchy maintains operational security. Officers know about Project Iceworm. Enlisted men don't. Personnel working in extended research tunnels sign additional non-disclosure agreements and receive hardship bonuses. Years later, several admit they suspected weapons-related construction but didn't ask questions because we figured if command wanted us to know, they'd tell us. Entertainment becomes creative necessity. The base newsletter, The Century Sentinel, publishes jokes, poetry, and fictional sports scores. Weekly film screenings draw full crowds. Some men study through correspondence courses. The extreme isolation provides uninterrupted study time. Others drink. Alcohol remains officially prohibited but informally tolerated in small quantities. Meanwhile, classified construction accelerates beyond public view. Between 1960 and 1963, Corps of Engineers teams extend survey tunnels up to 3 miles from the main facility, far beyond what any legitimate research mission requires. They test ice mechanical properties at various depths, tunnel stability under glacier movement, rail system prototypes for mobile launchers, vertical shaft drilling for missile silos, communication systems functioning through solid ice, ventilation for closed environments, effects of nuclear reactor heat on ice stability. Defense contractors simultaneously designed the complete Iceworm deployment system. 600 Minuteman missiles distributed across 60 subbases, connected by 2,500 miles of tunnels. Launch positions shifting on rail networks, making them impossible to target. Resupply via under-ice transport corridors. Projected cost, $2.7 billion, roughly $27 billion in current value. Construction timeline, 10 years. Strategic advantage, a nuclear arsenal that cannot be eliminated with a first strike. On paper, Iceworm represents tactical brilliance. In practice, the ice has already begun proving them catastrophically wrong. August 1962. Danish journalist Jürgen Bitsch receives permission to visit Camp Century for a feature story. American officials guide him through carefully staged areas, laboratory facilities, recreation spaces, the exterior of the nuclear reactor. His article in Berlingske Tidende praises Danish-American cooperation in advancing polar science. Bitsch includes detailed observations, tunnel dimensions, personnel numbers, casual mention of restricted areas we weren't permitted to photograph. In Copenhagen, the article generates mild interest. In Moscow, GRU analysts treat it differently. Soviet military intelligence compares Bitsch's descriptions against satellite reconnaissance photos and intelligence from other sources. The numbers don't align. The base extends far larger than reported. Summer construction activity suggests ongoing expansion, unusual for a completed research facility. October 1962. Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev receives the GRU assessment during the same month as the Cuban Missile Crisis. The report concludes, high probability Camp Century conceals underground missile deployment infrastructure. The Kremlin faces a dilemma. They cannot prove it. The ice hides everything. They cannot attack it. That triggers war with NATO. They cannot protest through diplomatic channels without revealing intelligence capabilities. Instead, they leak strategically. Soviet diplomats begin casual conversations with Danish counterparts. Interesting research station you're hosting? Quite extensive for climate studies, wouldn't you say? Pravda publishes editorials suggesting American militarization of the Arctic and deception of allied governments. The campaign succeeds. Danish left-wing newspapers start asking uncomfortable questions. Parliament members demand clarification from the Foreign Ministry. The USA State Department issues carefully worded denials. No offensive weapon systems are currently stationed in Greenland. Technically accurate because Iceworm remains under construction. The political pressure doesn't shut down Camp Century, but it limits expansion. Plans for additional research stations get quietly shelved. Project Iceworm enters extended review. More significantly, Soviet nuclear war planning shifts. Unable to confirm Iceworm's existence, they must assume it exists. Target lists now include saturation bombing of Greenland's ice sheet, multiple warheads designed to penetrate underground facilities. The base the Soviets imagined was more dangerous than what actually existed, which made their first strike planning more aggressive. Camp Century's secrecy created the very threat it aimed to prevent. The problem arrives gradually, then all at once. Greenland's ice sheet doesn't sit static like a frozen lake. It flows like an extremely slow river, pulsing toward the coast at 3 to 4 feet annually. Engineers knew this from the beginning. What they underestimated was the ice's behavior under pressure. The tunnels experience what glaciologists call creep closure. Millions of tons of ice press downward. The walls literally flow inward. What starts as a 26-foot wide corridor shrinks measurably each month. Maintenance crews trim back 6 to 8 inches of ice growth every few weeks. The tunnels are closing faster than projected. Differential movement creates worse complications. Different sections of Camp Century sit on ice flowing at varying rates. The tunnels don't just narrow, they twist. Door frames warp out of alignment. Support beams buckle. By 1963, doors that opened smoothly during installation now require force to close. Some won't close at all. The reactor chamber presents the most severe problem. As the facility's heaviest structure, it generates localized melting and refreezing. This creates a pocket of instability in otherwise predictable ice. The chamber essentially floats in a zone of constantly shifting ice, stressing every connection to the surrounding infrastructure. Engineers recalculate structural viability. Original projections estimated 10 to 15 years of tunnel stability. New data suggests 5 to 7 years maximum. Project Iceworm requires installations lasting 20 to 30 years. Mobile missile systems cannot relocate every decade. The construction costs alone would exceed any strategic benefit. The fundamental premise collapses. You cannot build permanent infrastructure inside a moving glacier. The ice won't hide the missiles. The ice will crush them. The PM-2A reactor compounds the strategic failure. Low-level coolant seepage into surrounding ice remains within 1960s military safety margins, acceptable for temporary installations. But Iceworm envisions dozens of reactors operating for decades. Even minor leaks accumulate. Radioactive coolant migrates through ice layers. Eventually, it reaches the ocean. Maintenance requirements prove equally problematic. In February 1963, technical failures shut down the reactor for 3 weeks. Camp Century reverts to diesel generators. Loud, inefficient, producing exhaust requiring constant ventilation. The vision of a silent, hidden base becomes impossible without reliable nuclear power. And portable nuclear reactors, engineers quietly acknowledge, remain experimental technology not ready for large-scale deployment. By late 1963, the technical obstacles align with political pressure. Danish scientists working at Century noticed discrepancies between stated research goals and actual construction activity. Danish liaison officers ask increasingly pointed questions about tunnel extent and purpose. January 1964. Danish newspapers obtain leaked documents suggesting Camp Century forms part of a larger strategic program. The government demands immediate clarification. U.S. Ambassador to Denmark, Catherine White, provides unsatisfying answers. State Department officials themselves hadn't received full briefings on Iceworm. May 19, 1964. The Pentagon shelves Project Iceworm. No public announcement, no press release. Internal documents mark the program indefinitely postponed, pending technological developments. Translation canceled. Camp Century will continue as an actual research station, the cover story becoming genuine mission. But the dream of 600 hidden nuclear missiles beneath Greenland's ice? Physics killed it, politics buried it, nature won. June 1966. Engineers shut down the PM-2A reactor for the final time. It had operated for 5 years with increasing maintenance demands. Removing it would require cutting through ice that has reformed around the reactor chamber, a process costing millions of dollars. The Corps of Engineers conducts a cost-benefit analysis. The reactor sits beneath the Greenland ice sheet, which reaches 4,000 feet thick at this location. Snow accumulates here at 10 feet annually. Within years, the facility will lie buried under hundreds of feet of ice. Within centuries, the glacier will carry it eastward toward the coast. Decision not worth retrieval costs. Technicians remove the radioactive fuel rods, the most dangerous components. Everything else stays. Reactor housing, coolant systems, contaminated pipes and valves. Similarly, thousands of gallons of diesel fuel remain in buried tanks. Sewage, PCBs, chemical waste. Official reasoning: the ice will entomb it permanently. The glacier will seal it away for millennia. Environmental regulations barely exist in 1966. The Arctic appears as an infinite frozen wasteland. Whatever gets buried there disappears. Forever. Evacuation proceeds across 3 months. Personnel rotate out gradually through summer 1966. Equipment deemed valuable, vehicles, generators, scientific instruments, gets airlifted to Thule Air Base. Everything else remains behind. The departing soldiers walk through corridors they carved from solid ice. Mess hall tables still stand in neat rows. The theater retains its last movie poster on the wall, The Great Escape. Someone's dark joke: the chapel preserves its cross carved from ice. Recreation room ping-pong paddles lie scattered on tables. Captain Wesley Curtis, final commanding officer, writes in his last report, Camp Century successfully demonstrated under ice habitation concepts. The facility exceeded design expectations and provided invaluable data for Arctic engineering applications. Closure results from strategic reassessment rather than technical failure. Diplomatic language: technical failure was exactly the reason. Specialist Robert Hammond, communications technician, becomes the last American to leave. He powers down the final radio transmitter on September 3, 1966, climbs the entrance ramp to the surface, watches Army bulldozers push snow over the opening. Years later, he recalled, "It felt like burying something alive. Those tunnels still stood intact. We simply walked away." For 3 years afterward, the military monitors the site remotely. Surface structures get dismantled. Snow accumulates rapidly, 10 feet the first year, 15 the second. By 1969, nothing remains visible above the ice. The United States classifies all Project Iceworm documentation. Official statements describe Camp Century as a successfully completed research program, demonstrating polar engineering capabilities. Denmark receives assurance that the abandoned facility poses no environmental risk. That assessment holds true in 1966. Ice accumulates over century, burying it deeper. Scientific projections suggest it will eventually rest 200 to 300 feet down, locked in ice for tens of thousands of years. Those projections assume stable climate. They assume the ice sheet isn't melting. They assume 1960s weather patterns persist indefinitely. 50 years later, those assumptions prove catastrophically wrong. August 2016. A team of climate scientists publishes findings in geophysical research letters that send shockwaves through diplomatic channels. Using ice-penetrating radar and climate modeling, they calculate that Camp Century's burial depth is decreasing. The Greenland ice sheet is thinning. Not just surface melting during summer months, the entire sheet is losing mass. Camp Century currently sits approximately 115 feet below the surface. Under moderate climate projections, it could face meltwater infiltration by 2090. The buried waste inventory becomes critical. 200,000 liters of diesel fuel, radioactive coolant from the nuclear reactor, PCBs from electrical equipment, sewage from 7 years of 200-person occupation, chemical waste from construction operations. The study's conclusion uses careful academic language. Camp Century's waste was sequestered under the assumption of perpetual ice sheet stability. That assumption no longer holds valid. International media seizes the story within days. Headlines spread across newspapers worldwide. U.S. nuclear waste ticking time bomb under Greenland. Climate change exposes Cold War secret. Melting ice reveals radioactive legacy. Denmark demands immediate answers. The Danish Foreign Ministry summons the American ambassador for explanation. Parliament members who approved Camp Century decades earlier, those still living, express shock at learning the true scope of what was built on their territory. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers issues measured responses about monitoring the situation and assessing remediation options. But questions of legal responsibility remain murky. The 1951 defense agreement between Denmark and the United States didn't explicitly prohibit military construction. It also didn't authorize nuclear weapons infrastructure. Environmental laws from the 1960s didn't require cleanup of abandoned Arctic installations. In 2017, the Pentagon declassifies portions of Project Iceworm documentation, heavily redacted, but confirming what Danish officials suspected. Danish Foreign Minister Anders Samuelsen calls the planned missile deployment a profound violation of trust between allied nations. Greenlandic Premier Kim Kielsen speaks more bluntly, "They lied to us, used our land for weapons programs. Now we inherit the contamination. Who pays for remediation?" That question remains unresolved in 2024. Glaciologists now monitor Camp Century as an unintended climate indicator. The site has become a case study in how warming affects polar ice and what happens to materials buried under assumptions of permanent freezing. Research published between 2019 and 2023 shows ice accumulation rates declining 15% since 1990. Summer melt layers penetrating deeper into the sheet. Century's depth decreased from approximately 150 feet in the 1980s to 115 feet by 2016. If current trends continue, contamination could begin leaching decades earlier than initial projections suggested. Camp Century's failure taught military engineers what not to do, but its successes shaped Cold War infrastructure in unexpected ways. The under-ice construction techniques influenced NORAD's Cheyenne Mountain Complex, completed in 1966. Engineers applied lessons about underground facility design, though in solid rock, rather than flowing ice. The Soviet Union developed similar concepts during the 1960s and 70s, submarine bases carved into Arctic coastal glaciers. Several remain operational today. Modern Antarctic research stations use tunnel-building methods pioneered at Century. France's Concordia Station and Japan's Dome Fuji Station employ arch-shaped corridors and pressure management systems first tested beneath Greenland ice. The portable nuclear reactor concept, despite its problems, proved viable enough for limited deployment. The U.S. military installed similar reactors at remote installations through the 1970s before transitioning to more reliable systems. Ironically, Camp Century's cover story produced genuine scientific advancement. Ice core drilling techniques developed there revolutionized climate research. Cores extracted from the Greenland ice sheet provided detailed climate records extending back 100,000 years, early evidence of rapid historical climate change. The same facility built to hide nuclear weapons inadvertently helped prove the climate crisis that would eventually expose it. NASA studied Camp Century when designing space station life support systems. How do humans maintain psychological health in isolated artificial environments? Research on Century personnel influenced crew selection for long-duration missions.